Hello, this is the Fiction Nonfiction Podcast from Literary Hub, where we believe that every issue in your Twitter feed or on the evening news has already been tackled somewhere in literature. I'm Whitney Terrell, the author of the novel The Good Lieutenant.
I'm Vivi Ganeshananthan, also known as Sugi, author of the novel Love Marriage.
Sugi, if you were going to reinvent a genre, which is our episode title today, what would it be?
The Harper's Letter.
I didn't know, is that a genre? I guess, that's the manifesto genre, right?
There
actually is a genre of Harper's Manifesto, because I remember, didn't Ben Marcus has written one? And who was it? Franzen wrote one years ago. Anyway, so you're not.
I'd like to try my hand at something else.
All right.
I would like to write a rom-com. I have a plot worked out. It's secret, so I can't talk about it. What about you?
This is totally lame, but I always wanted to write a book of poetry because I started off as a poet. So does that count as a genre? If I wrote poetry, it would certainly be reinventing that genre.
You must have been a good poet. I think honestly, what I want to write is political satire. I grew up in suburban Maryland and very much kind of reading a lot of political coverage in the Washington Post, and I think a genre mashup that would overlap well there would be, crime solving. I'd like to write a novel about a woman who solves crimes, a woman who solves political crimes. This, I think, would bring everything.
So an autobiography, is that what you're saying?
Yes, exactly.
All right. Well, today, our reinventing genre episode is going to make all of your dreams come true, Sugi, because there are some big names who have done this, and they're going to talk to us about it. Later in the show, we have Sarah Paretsky of V.I. Warshawski fame joining us to discuss her new story collection. But first, we're thrilled to be joined by Christopher Buckley here to talk to us about his new political satire. And you're going to introduce him as soon as I mention that we have an intern working with us, Dylan, who is referenced several times in the podcast. And so we have to say hello to Dylan as well.
Now we're excited to welcome Christopher Buckley. Christopher Buckley is a novelist, essayist, humorist, critic, magazine editor, and memoirist. His books have been translated into 16 foreign languages. He's worked as a merchant seaman and White House speechwriter. He's written for many newspapers and magazines, lectured in over 70 cities around the world, and written 15 novels, including Supreme Courtship, Boomsday, No Way to Treat a First Lady, and The White House Mess. He was awarded the Thurber Prize for American Humor and the Washington Irving Medal for Literary Excellence, and his most recent novel is Make Russia Great Again, a satire of the Trump administration. Christopher, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on.
So this is your second time writing a novel that's a faux memoir from a former White House chief of staff, and we're so excited to talk to you about political satire in the age of Trump. The narrator of the book is Herbert K. Nutterman, a former GM for some, he's got all the names in this book are so fantastic. He's a former GM for some Trump properties who came out of retirement to serve Trump in the White House. And he's writing a retrospective tell-all from a federal correctional institution, which is a fantastic premise. I wonder if you would start us off by reading a section from the book.
Sure. This is what's happened, just by way of setup. The premise of the book is that there's a computer deep in the bowels of U.S. Cyber Command that is designed to retaliate against any country that interferes in one of our elections. And it's autonomous, in case the chain of command has been interrupted or the president can't be reached or whatever. And so after Russia interferes rather massively in our 2016 election, the U.S. doesn't retaliate, it autonomously retaliates, and Vladimir Putin is defeated in a re-election and loses to the head of the Russian Communist Party, and so Trump doesn't know about this, but his aides do, and they don't know what to do, because if they tell him, he'll go absolutely ballistic, because we know how much he likes Mr. Trump, Mr. Putin. So anyway, they're trying to figure out what to do, and this is Herb. I've since asked myself, should I have marched into the Oval Office and told Mr. Trump everything and thrown myself on his mercy? Before I answer my own question, a few points. One, mercy is not really Mr. Trump's thing, nor is forgiveness. Sorry, I don't mean to laugh at my own stuff, but it's kind of funny. He demanded perfection. And why shouldn't he? It was this very quality that made him a giant in the hospitality world. Two, the "I'm only the messenger here" defense doesn't work with Mr. Trump. In Trump world, the messenger was generally the first to die. Over the years, I'd seen many a messenger hurled into the alligator-filled moat at Farago-sur-Mer. That's the name of one of Mr. Trump's hotels. Three, as a result of the relentless attacks on him by the enemies of the people, the Democrat witch hunter impeachers, the never Trumpers, the college-educated portion of the electorate, the migrant huggers, Kurd lovers, the whole Trump-detesting kitten caboodle, the poor president was by this point just plain worn out. Why trouble him with this? Putin was going to win the runoff election. The caravan would move on. His presidency had been a nonstop conveyor belt of unpleasantness. The chorus line of tramps clamoring for hush money, the devastating release of the tax returns, prescient. Where are we? Stop laughing at yourself. The Senate trial, the rumors about Vice President Pence trying to get the cabinet members to invoke the 25th Amendment, all of it. Mr. Trump's mental state was, I don't want to say precarious, fragile. This is not to say I agreed with Romy O'Reilly that he was a, quote, head case. But for me to go into the Oval, as we call the Oval Office, and say, oh, by the way, sir, seems one of our computers hacked the Russian election. And did I mention that the CIA put the #2 communist on our payroll? What do you think Mr. Putin will make of them apples? Ready for your second double whopper with bacon? It might just put Mr. Trump over the edge. Call me squeamish, but it is my firm belief that one should think twice before inducing a nervous breakdown in someone with a finger on the nuclear button. Finally, 4. By now, I had come to the regretful conclusion that Mr. Putin probably did, in fact, have something on Mr. Trump. Why did I come to this conclusion? Call it intuition, call it what you will. But as I assembled the various pieces of the jigsaw puzzle, it began to make sense. The heroic, if that's quite the right word, lengths Mr. Trump had gone to in order to keep Putin happy. Calling his own intelligence people bozos for saying Russia interfered in 2016. Holding up military assistance to Ukraine. Poo-pooing the fact that Mr. Putin routinely murdered journalists and dissidents, very often unpleasantly. And generally never missing an opportunity to say something positive about my beautiful friend, Vladimir.
Thank you very much. I mean, I love that passage. And so many things that are happening when you were writing the book that are now happening again. And we're going to get to, I mean, there's already this issue with the bounties that have been put on the heads of troops in Afghanistan that involves Russia. It seems directly.
I'm sort of glad I didn't come up with that.
Right.
It's so awful.
I know, it's so terrible, but it's right in the same groove that you're talking about.
Yeah. It's it falls a little bit into the category of you can't make this stuff up. Anyway, I'd written a couple of, I gave up satire, political satire, about 4 or 5 years ago on the grounds that, American politics had become sufficiently self-satirizing. It didn't need me to come along and poke fun at. And so I wrote a couple of historical novels, and they did okay, but they didn't knock Hillary Mantel off the mantelpiece. And people kept saying, "God, why aren't you writing about this?" It's And I said, "Well, I'm not really sure I know how to write about it." As an object of satire, Mr. Trump is both to use the expression, a low-hanging fruit, and a challenge. He's a challenge, I think, precisely because he's a low-hanging fruit. The book got a rather nice review in the Washington Post earlier this week, and the reviewer said it's not so much that Buckley's shooting fish in a barrel. He's like a fly gleefully circling a very large pile of manure.
I read this review, which we actually have had Ron on our show, and I.
Oh well, he's my
wonderful.
Favorite person in the universe right now. I wrote him a thank you letter offering him my firstborn child, my secondborn child. But it was a very well, obviously I loved the review, but it was very wittily written. But I love the fly circling pile of manure image. If I ever have a coat of arms, that's what I'm going to put on. But anyway, so I'd written two drafts of this book, and they weren't. Not only were they not very funny, they weren't very good, and I was about to give up because it's rewriting a novel is kind of a drag. When my editor,
we know about that.
Oh, do you know about that? Yeah.
Yeah.
Fun, isn't it? Don't try this at home, kids. But my longtime editor, my beloved Jonathan Karp, who's now CEO of Simon & Schuster, said, "Why don't you do it? Why don't you recast it as another White House mess?" And it was the scales fell from my eyes. The light bulb appeared over my head. I felt the earth tremble. It was just sort of a liberating insight, and that draft was much more fun to write. There's something about if you have a sympathetic narrator who's in over his head. Herb is a decent guy in a swamp of indecency, and he's trying to hold on to his dignity and his integrity, even though he knows exactly where he is. I once watched an interview with John Cleese, the great John Cleese, and he said that he was talking about Fawlty Towers, his wonderful brief limited series about a manic, crazy hotel owner in England, and he said it's more fun to show someone watching someone go crazy than just to show the person going crazy directly. And that's the conceit here. The first person, the Herb trying to, swallow. He has to swallow his pride at every step of the way. At one point, he says something like, "It had gotten to the point where I began to feel virtuous by simply not repeating a falsehood." Anyway.
Yeah, so I think that, one of the interesting things about this position is, right, this is a figure that I think I've been fascinated by in the Trump administration all along, the circles of complicity that surround the president. And Herb sort of strikes me as part of this, like he's an insider, but he's also an outsider. He's trying to, as you put it, that dichotomy of the presidential memoirs, it's not my fault. It would have been so much worse if I weren't here. And Herb seems to fit into that really precisely. And then also Dylan made this observation, and then I thought it was really smart that sort of throughout the book, you can see Herb sort of saying, well, I don't want to say this,
Yeah,
but
right.
so he
says,
manages to.
Yeah, the president, well, in that passage I just read,
Yeah.
he said, the president's mental health was, I don't want to say precarious, fragile. And he repeats that device, which is, a way of saying what you want to say without saying it.
Right.
It's a little bit, classically Mark Antony's funeral oration for Caesar. I do not say that Caesar was ambitious. Anyway, there I go, likening myself to Shakespeare.
Wow.
No, just kidding. But anyway.
So you were talking a little bit before about, thinking that Trump presents a distinctive challenge to satire. And one early take on Trump was that he might single-handedly ruin this whole genre because he's already such an exaggerated figure. But now there are all these imitators, Alec Baldwin, of course, Stephen Colbert, Anthony Atamanuk, and Sarah Cooper, who ZZ Packer just wrote about.
Sarah Cooper has pioneered an entire new genre. I think it's really the most brilliant thing I've ever seen. I don't know how she does it. Technically, but it is. I think she's the funniest, the funniest satirist to come out of this. Although Stephen Colbert is relentlessly brilliant, and Trevor Noah and it's J.L. Colvin, I think is these. You can see these stars are being born out of all this.
So
Kurt Anderson.
Sarah Cooper. Sorry, I was just thinking. Sarah Cooper's the one who does the TikTok videos where she lip syncs. Yeah.
Yeah.
What's interesting is that
and
she
there's
doesn't.
Just something hilarious about watching a young female person of color with Trump's voice coming out of her mouth.
Right, that's the thing, is like all the other ones, Alec Baldwin dresses up like him, but this one, she's got no makeup. She's just herself doing the thing. There's something about that makes it work. It
is just, and you get it within the 5 seconds of seeing her the first time. You go, what is this? And then you start howling.
And so there's this interesting thing. I was just thinking about satire and forgiveness and consequences, and Herb and Trump are not morally ambiguous people, and they don't really evolve, but some of the more neutral or more moral characters in this story face extreme hardship, while villains are forgiven by their supporters and get off scot-free. I don't want to put spoilers in here, so I'll leave it to you to kind of decide how far down that road you want to go. But throughout the story, people rarely seem to learn the lesson. And I was just thinking about, and the statement's been in the news again, because Susan Collins, for her impeachment vote, was sort of like, I think Trump learned his lesson, and now there's a lot of headlines about, vote her out. Trump clearly did not learn anything. And just how do you think about forgiveness and consequences in our current political scene and in satire specifically?
I think that unfortunate statement by Susan is going to haunt her, to the end of her days. It just is the silence of the Republican Senate, which I think more and more of as the silence of the lambs, is going to haunt them. Herb is writing the author of this White House memoir. Bear in mind, is writing it from prison, from Federal Correction Institute, Wingdale, as it's called, where when he's not writing his memoirs, he's teaching napkin folding classes in vocational training. He used to be the food and beverage manager at Mar-a-Lago. We mustn't give away the end, but I leave ambiguous why Herb is writing this from jail, but you can deduce from the length, from the severity of his sentence, that it was something that made the prosecutor want to throw the book at him. And with brushstrokes, suggests that this is because he has protected Mr. Trump. And he is still, he's, 7 years later, however long it is, he's still hopeful of the pardon that is continually being. Trump does this. He's really, his cruelty seems limitless. He's forever, you see, he does it publicly. He's forever dangling the prospect of a pardon, for Manafort, for Stone, and somehow I guess he who did he pardon? He pardoned a couple of war criminals, which was unfortunate. Eddie Gallagher, the Navy SEAL captain. But sometimes, unfortunately, in life, sometimes the evil goes unpunished. We know this, and so I didn't want it to be too pat in the sense that everyone of virtue is rewarded and everyone who does evil is punished. It's life is usually a little less less rigorously templated than that. The rule of fiction generally is that your characters have to change. A character shouldn't be at the end of the story the same person he or she was at the beginning. Unless
that's the complication with somebody like Trump, because he's not going to change, right?
No, he doesn't. And the book that also is being published this Monday by Simon & Schuster, by Mary Trump, I believe makes that point, that he does not change. He has not changed by his own admission. I think he's somewhere, there's a tape of Trump saying, I'm the same person I was when I was one. Who would boast of such a thing? Have you ever said, I haven't changed since I was 3 years old? No, there hasn't been much development. And I gather in Ms. Trump's forthcoming book, we will learn that much of the, call it blame for that, came from the tyrannical father figure. There's a poem by Philip Larkin. Can I say the F word on this?
Oh, yeah.
You can.
There's a poem by Philip Larkin called, titled This Be the Verse. And it's one of my favorite poems. They fuck you up, your mom and dad. They may not mean to, but they do. They fill you with the faults they had and add some extra just for you. Look for that poem to be quoted in the weeks ahead as we read reviews of Ms. Trump's book.
Thank you for writing the book and for joining us.
Well, thank you. And thank you, Dylan, young man. I'm expecting greatness from you.
And we'll remind our listeners to go pick up a copy of Make Russia Great Again, a fantastic, hilarious book with a red hat on the cover. Thank you so much, Christopher.
Thank you.